Also talked a little bit about apple butter and peanut butter. I don't know if anybody remembers that illustration from last year. But anyways, it is a great blessing to be here. My name is Stan Duack, and I have been, if I make it to December, I'll be in the Bernie Church for 29 years. I grew up in Walnut Ridge, Arkansas. I was born in Pocahontas, Arkansas. Went to Crowledge Ridge College for a few years, and then also transferred to Arkansas State University, where I graduated with a degree in ag business and a master's in agriculture, and ended up preaching. So I have been preaching and met my lovely wife Millie at Pocahontas, Arkansas, at a gospel meeting, and I think it was April the 7th, 1983, and we married in December. So we've been married 30. When if we make it to December, it'll be 34 years. All right. So, but anyways, I do hope to encourage you and help you. I love the story of the two farmers that were decided to go out and go hunting. Well, one of the farmers was really optimistic, and the other one was always negative. You ever been around somebody negative all the time, and everything this guy, if it rained, it's going to rain too much and ruin the crops. If it didn't rain, it's going to be too dry and it's going to ruin the crops. Everything was always negative. Well, his friend decided, he said, I want to take you duck hunting, and I want to show you something special. So he said, all right, I'll go with you. He said, but I bet your dog can't even go get a duck. So they go out and they get out there duck hunting, and sure enough, here come a few ducks, and they shoot the ducks, and he said, all right, let's see if your dog's any good at all. He said, watch this. He said, Rover, go get him. Rover takes off and walks on top of the water, picks the ducks up, brings them back, and lays them at the guy's feet. The guy looks at him and said, what do you think about that? The negative farmer said, yeah, your dog can't swim. Well, I'm not going to try to be negative tonight. I'm going to try to be positive and encouraging and stirring and motivating. Challenge each of us to love and good works. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is found in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16, where Paul is trying to encourage the church at Ephesus. He'd already talked to them about being chosen, adopted, redeemed. He had talked about being in the marvelous grace of God. He talked about how that we were created in Christ Jesus to do good works. And he prayed for them that they could comprehend God's amazing love. He prays for unity here. And then he says in verse 15 and 16, but speaking the truth in love, that we may grow up in all things into him who is the head of the Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part or every person does its share or does its part, and it causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. Did you notice that there, that Paul is saying to the church at Ephesus, when everyone does their part, it causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. And so when I pray more, guess what? The church prays more. When I give more, the church gives more. When I love more, the church loves more. When I serve more, the church serves more. But the challenge for you and I is every one of us can do our part. And the reality is if we don't do our part, it can make an eternal difference. Several years ago, there was a small plane. It was not real small. It held about 27 passengers, and they were flying along fine. And the pilot hadn't noticed that a little screw, smaller than the end of my little finger here, had come out, and it was the one that covered the altitude, the plane, when it goes up and down. And he didn't realize that he was climbing higher and higher and higher because this little screw had fell out, and the gauge wasn't working properly, and the plane stalled, and all 27 people died because one person or one part, one little screw didn't do its part. Do you realize what you do can make an eternal difference in the lives of people? Or what you don't do can make an eternal difference in the lives of people? Maybe you don't invite somebody to a gospel meeting. Maybe you don't invite somebody to Vacation Bible School. Maybe you don't reach out to help somebody. Maybe you don't send a card of encouragement. It could make an eternal difference in the lives of people. And I want to challenge you with just a couple of things tonight that every one of you can do to make a difference in the church, to help it grow. Every one of you can pray. You know, the Bible says in James chapter 5, verse 16, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. James said in James chapter 4, you have not because you ask not, or because you ask amiss. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, pray without ceasing. John said if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. Do you realize that when we pray that we're talking to the creator of the universe? And I know if I were to ask you, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I could ask this evening, do any of you struggle in your prayer life? We probably would all say it's not what it ought to be. But do you realize that prayer can make a difference in the lives of people when you're praying for them? When you're going before the creator of the universe on someone else's behalf, it can make an eternal difference. And I encourage people, sometimes, several years ago, we had a man in our congregation, Ronnie Curtis. Ronnie had been away from the Lord for a long time. He was restored to the Lord. Ronnie had bad infection in his legs, and it made it difficult for him to come to services. Ronnie had a big heart. He was a very giving individual, helped some kids go to church camp and would help with mission trips and other things. He would do whatever he could to help. And I would go over and I would see Ronnie and say, Ronnie, I said, I want you to be praying because this week we're going to church camp. And he said, I'll pray. He said, I'll pray several times a day. I'll be praying about this, and I'm going to continue to pray. And he did. And that week we led 12 young people to Christ. Do you think that had a difference in it? It's something he could do. He couldn't get out. He couldn't cook. He couldn't do a lot of other things. But he could pray that the gospel seed could be shown. And one of the greatest things that we can do is pray. And, you know, I think it's not the only thing we can do, but one of the greatest things that we can do is pray on someone else's behalf. Remember, the apostles thought that was such an important thing in Acts chapter 6 and verse 7, that they got somebody else to take care of the Grecian widow. So they said, because we want to spend time where? In prayer and ministry of the Word. You see, we can be out serving and be busy all the time, but prayer is valuable in the church, and it's something that every Christian can do if they will. I remember several years ago, there was a story back in the 80s of a mission team from Kenya. They'd gone to Kenya. They were 5 Christian families decided to leave the U.S., and they went to Kenya, and they were all excited. We're going to take Kenya for Christ. And you know, the people were receptive. People were listening to the message. And that first year, they taught and they worked and they taught and they worked, and they baptized 600 into Christ. And they thought, man, we think we ought to be able to reach more than that. So they worked and they worked and they worked and they labored. And the next year they thought they reached 462 for Christ. Now we would think that's pretty good if you could baptize 462 people. And that would be pretty incredible for a lot of folks. But they thought, that's just not working. And the next year they worked and labored and labored and they baptized 350 into Christ. And they were so discouraged. Well, during that year, 3 of the families had health issues and had to go home. But they said, I tell you what, we're going to spend less time working and more time praying. And so every family made a decision to pray every day, several times a day, spending more time in prayer to God on this mission field. By the end of the year, they had baptized 1,300 people into Christ and started 34 new churches. Do you think prayer had a part in that? When we ask God to help us, I mean, the reliance on God. I like Charles Hodge's book quote. He said, I don't believe in prayer. He says, I believe in God, therefore I pray. And that's the challenge for you and I, praying and how it can make a difference. One of my favorite stories is about a lady several years ago. Tex Williams was working in South Africa, and he was doing mission work there, and he was going out every weekend, or at least 3 weekends out of the month, sharing the gospel in that particular area. Back in the 70s, I believe it was. He didn't have a whole lot of money, and they were just doing mission work. And he had gotten a letter from a man in part of South Africa that he had not been to before. It was about 3 or 4 hours away. And he said, I got part of a track. It had been run over by a tire. And I saw the address, and I saw that it talked about Jesus. And he said, I wanted you to come and tell us about Jesus. This man and his wife were the only educated people in that village, in that area. Well, Tex Williams thought, he sent back saying, I'll go. But he didn't know how he was going to get there. He didn't know what was going to make a difference. Well, he didn't know in Greenville, Texas, there was a little widow lady who'd been reading all of his reports about all the things he'd been doing about sharing the gospel in South Africa, and how he was going out on weekends, and he could only go out 2 or 3 weekends a month because he didn't have enough money. But he was going out and he was telling people about Jesus, and he was leading many, many to Christ. Well, a couple of days before he was to leave on Friday to go to this particular area, which he did not have the money to go to, he received a cashier's check for $27.50. Now, that's not much today, but back then it was worth a little bit more. And this little widow lady said, I saw about the good work you were doing, and it said I'd saved my nickels and pennies and dimes, and I wanted to save $100. She said, I was babysitting, I was sewing, I was doing everything I could to help send some money for you to go into this particular area and teach these people the gospel. And she said, I want you to know I pray every day, several times a day, for your work. And I'm praying fervently day after day after day that God will use this money to His glory. Well, it was enough money for Tex Williams to go to that particular area. They went to that particular area, baptized the man and his wife and 7 others. Went back several weeks later, baptized 13 others, started 2 churches, and after several years, they've led hundreds and hundreds to Christ in that one particular area. Let me ask you, did prayer make a difference in that? Did that woman doing what she could do make an eternal difference in the lives of those people? What if she had not sent that check and he hadn't gone? Do you realize those people wouldn't have known Christ, and they could have died lost eternally? But a little widow lady did what she could do, and she made an eternal difference. So I want you to realize there's great value in prayer. You're talking to the Creator of the universe. And secondly, I want us to realize that it doesn't mean we don't have to do the big things. Many times we think, well, I'm not the song leader. I'm not the preacher. I'm not the great missionary. I'm not like Mike Napier, who goes over to Africa and does a tremendous work over there. Mike's just a wonderful, godly man who's blessed my life in a lot of ways. I'm not but when you stand before the day of judgment, what does he say? He said, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. He was talking about things that each and every one of us could do. He didn't say you've preached 1,000. He didn't say you've led 1,000 songs. He didn't say you've been on 10 mission trips. He said you did what you could. And so many times we think what little things I do don't make a difference, but the reality is they do make a difference. They make an eternal difference in the lives of people. When we do little things, God can take them and make great things happen. That's what Jesus did with a few loaves and a couple of fish. He fed thousands. That's what God could do with a jawbone of a donkey in the hands of Samson. Slay over 1,000 Philistines. That's what Moses could do with a staff in Exodus chapter 4, verse 2. That's not something amazing. That's something not more. But God could take that staff and use it to lead the people of Israel out of bondage. God took small things and did great things with them. What could David do with 5 smooth stones? He could take down Goliath and lead the Israelite nation into victory. And see, the same thing is true for you and I. He says pure and undefiled religion is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. James chapter 1, verse 27. You see, there's something that each and every one of us can do to make a difference. And that's what I want you to think about something. I want you to pick something out, and this week I want you to do it. And to think about it this month. What can I do for the Lord? Some of you may know a guy by the name of George Hewitt. He worked at Bono Church of Christ several years ago. George and I became friends. He went to Heritage Christian University. I went there. We've met a few times, and we visited a few times. And he shares a story on one particular instance where he would go down to the nursing home and visit. He would go once a week to the nursing home, and he would visit. I don't know if you've ever heard this story before, but it's a very powerful story. And there was one particular lady in this particular nursing home that had Alzheimer's dementia really bad, and she didn't know anybody, didn't know anything. And he would go in and he would say, he said, "Hi, my name is George Hewitt." And she'd look at him and say, "What's your name?" And he'd say, "Hi, my name is George Hewitt, and I preach at the Bono Church of Christ." And she'd say, "What's your name?" He'd say, "My name's George Hewitt, and I preach at the Bono Church of Christ. And I'm married to so-and-so." And she'd say, "What's your name?" And he said, I made it my goal to spend 10 minutes a week with her every week. And when she died, he did her funeral. As George tells the story, through that one encounter, or through that one relationship, he was able to lead over 20 people to Christ. Do you think that made a difference? Can anybody go to a nursing home and spend 10 minutes with somebody who's sick and discouraged and weary? Sure you can. You can make a difference. And I want you to think about, what can I do and what can God do in my hands, in my life? You see, he's concerned about the small things. We read about the widow's mite and what she gave. She gave all she had, but God took it and used it to his glory. And you can do that as well. Whatever small things you may have, God can take them and do great things through your life if only you will let him. Another story that just I'm going to share I want to share ideas with you. I'm sharing ideas of something you can do. Many of you may have heard of John Clayton. John Clayton was an atheist who became a Christian many years ago, and he goes around sharing his story. But he was outside of Houston, Texas, and he was doing a meeting down there in that particular thing, and he was visiting with a lady, and this lady's name was Phyllis Watkins. And Phyllis came to John, and she said, "John, would you go into an elders meeting with me?" She said, "I want to start a cradle roll class. We don't have a cradle roll class at our congregation." There were a church about 140 members, 150 members. They didn't have a cradle roll class for the babies. And she said, I just want to teach babies about Jesus." And she said, "John, would you go into the elders meeting with me?" And so John did. And Terry, a true statement, one of the elders said, "Let's hurry up and get this over with. We don't have time to talk about babies." But anyways, after meeting with them, they said, "You can have the old boiler room down there." They went down there, and there was lawnmowers and trash and all kinds of stuff, but she was excited. She thought, "I am going to start my cradle roll class." And she was so excited about it that she went down there and she began to clean it up immediately. Her husband, who was kind of a quiet, shy guy, didn't say a whole lot, but he was a good carpenter. So he built her a little round area where she could teach babies about Jesus. And that next Sunday, she was so excited because she had 2 babies in her class. Her grandbaby, another one she kept. And she was so excited. Well, about 8 or 10 years later, John Clayton came back to that particular area. And that congregation had been about 140 members for about 100 years, or a long time anyways. And they came back to that came back to that congregation, John Clayton did. He walked in, and that congregation had gone to 320 members. And he thought, wow, what's happening? What's going on? And he walked into this, there was this large addition off to the side of it. And he walked in there, and there were 76 babies. And there was Phyllis Watkins teaching babies about Jesus. And she said, you're just not going to believe it. It's great. You know, she said, we just decided, I got the teenagers involved. We started getting fruit baskets. Anytime a new family had a baby in our community, we took them a fruit basket and we took them a blanket and said, we'd love to teach your child about Jesus. And every time they knew about a new birth, they went and shared with that family, said, we would be honored if you would let us teach your baby about Jesus. One lady in that class that he visited with that day drove 30 miles just to have her baby in Phyllis Watkins' class. 76 babies. That church went from 140 members to 320 members because a lady got excited about teaching babies about Jesus. I'm here to tell you, when you do little things, God can make great things happen out of it. Do you realize that? And what's even more amazing than that, when Phyllis Watkins started the Cradle Roll class, she was 76 years old. Can you do that? Can you find something that you can do for God and allow Him to work in your life and to bless the lives of others? You see, you never know what you may do and how it may make an eternal difference. It may be just sending out, about a lady I read about in Davenport, Oklahoma. Her name was Kim Mayhill. Kim is a small church, about 60, 70 members, and she wanted to do something for the church. So she, it's a small community. Anytime anybody in the community was in the hospital, she sent them a card. Well, lo and behold, one Sunday, a couple showed up for church, and their name were Eldon and Myrtle Garrison. And they began to share their story. Said Eldon was in the hospital. He had had open heart surgery. He wasn't been doing very well. And we never really had time to think about God. But we got a card from your church, from Kim Mayhill, who said, we would love to have you at our church. And any way we can serve you, we'd be glad to. We didn't have a church affiliation. We didn't know anything about God. So we decided to come to your church. And they visited. And they listened to the message. And the next week, Eldon and his wife walked down the aisle and were baptized into Christ. And the next week, Eldon died suddenly of complications. Let me ask you, did that card make an eternal difference in his life? It's something that you can do. It's something that I can do. It's something that somebody can do. It doesn't have to be the great big things. It can be inviting to a gospel meeting. It can be... I love the story. Bob Davidson shared the story years ago when he'd done mission work in Thailand. He was up in the New York area back in the 60s or 70s, and they had a gospel meeting going on. And he was walking down the street with a preacher, and there was a drunk walking down the street. The guy didn't even really know what was going on. Bob kind of caught the guy, intercepted him, and sent him down his road. But while he had the guy, they'd been passing out tracts, inviting people to the gospel meeting. Well, the drunk was just walking on by. Well, Bob just slipped a tract in the guy's pocket. Well, the next morning, the guy wakes up, and there's a tract laying on his desk, or in his pocket. And he said, it's a miracle. He shows up to church the next night. A couple nights later, he's baptized into Christ. About 25 years later, Bob Davidson's doing a mission conference. They're talking about India. And a man stands up and says, are you Bob Davidson? He says, yes, I am. He said, my name is Craig Phillips, and I'm a missionary in India. He said, you helped lead my dad to Christ, who was a drunk in New York. I'm putting a tract in his pocket. And now I'm a missionary in India, and he has led thousands of people to Christ. Did that tract make a difference? Did that tract make a difference? On a side note, he married Eddie Clower's daughter, and is sharing the gospel like crazy all over India. You see, something that you can do, something that I can do that can make an eternal difference in the lives of people. And I hope that you think about that. Thirdly, my final point, all right, but it's a good one too. It's just be an encourager. Encourage people. You know, we live in a world of people that are hurting. I read about a guy, no kidding, he was hurting so bad he had no friends, no family. He would go to the funeral home of people he didn't know and walk through the line just so he'd get a hug. He was that lonely. We live in a world full of people that are hurting and discouraged and weary, and they want to call it quits. I don't know about how many of you in this audience have just got too much encouragement this past week? Anybody in here got too much encouragement? How many of you got too many compliments? You don't want any more compliments. You say, I've had enough. I've had my quota. I'm done. No. Because we all need that. Because it motivates us. And that's why he says in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 13, to encourage one another daily. Why? Because he's reminding them that some of them are getting weary, they're getting discouraged, and they're about to give up. And he says in Hebrews 10:24, stir each to consider one another and to stir each other into love and good works, exhorting or encouraging one another so much more as you see the day approaching. You see, encouragement makes a difference in the lives of people. It can make a discouraged person day be brighter. I think about Barnabas being a son of encouragement. He took Paul in when the other Christians wouldn't accept him. In Acts chapter 9, verses 20 through 27. When John Mark had abandoned them, Barnabas was the one that said, he's going to be good. I want to take him on the second journey. And Paul said, no. But old Barnabas encouraged him and built him up. And John Mark had quit on that first trip. And Barnabas encouraged him, and he worked with him, and he built him up. And at the end of Paul's life, who did Paul ask for? He said, send John Mark to me, for he's useful to me in the ministry. Why is he useful? Because Barnabas encouraged him. Because Barnabas helped him along the way. Well, what if Barnabas hadn't done that? Then perhaps John Mark wouldn't have been where he was at as a Christian. And I'm here to tell you that encouragement makes all kinds of difference. I remember as a young boy when I was 14, I became a Christian at 14 at the Main Street Church of Christ in Walnut Ridge. I didn't know anything about singing. I didn't know what alto, bass, tenor, soprano was. They said, you want to lead a song? I said, sure. I didn't know how to carry a tune in a bucket, Mike. It was one of those things. But I'd try to get up and try. And I remember singing, Here I Labor and Toil. There's a mansion now empty just waiting for me. I led that probably when I was about 15 or 16. I did try others first. And there was a little old lady at our church named Exie Jones, and she would come down that aisle after I led singing, and she'd say, I just love it when you lead that song, with tears in her eyes. How do you think it made me feel? Boy, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to give up song leading. Even when I couldn't, the first sermon I preached, Mike, I preached for 3 minutes. I covered heaven, hell, and Genesis to Revelation in 3 minutes. Now, that was my fast sermon, all right? Some of you say, I wish you'd speed this one up, get it over with. But I did it all in 3 minutes, and people said, man, I appreciate you sharing the Word of God with us tonight. As we young boys tried to get up, and they encouraged us, they built us up. And so as they did that, we wanted to do it again, and we wanted to do it again, and we wanted to do it again, because somebody was encouraging us. And that's what makes a difference. Encouragement can make a difference in the lives of people. I want to share a story with you. It reminds us about the importance of encouragement. We need to look for those people who need encouragement. And there are people everywhere that need encouragement in the church and in the world. Teddy Stollard was one of those young boys who needed encouragement. He was disinterested in school. He had musty, wrinkled clothes. His hair was never combed. He was one of those kids with a deadpan face. He sat there expressionless, unfocused. He would stare. When Miss Thompson spoke to Teddy, he always answered in monosyllables. Unattractive, unmotivated, and distant. He was just plain hard to like. Even though the teacher said she loved all students the same, she got a little extra joy out of putting a red X on his answers when he got them wrong. She knew better. She had read the reports. The report said, first grade, Teddy shows promise with his work and attitude, but he has a poor home situation. Second grade, Teddy could do better. Mother is seriously ill. He received little help at home. Third grade, Teddy's a good boy, but he's too serious. He's a slow learner. His mother died last year. Fourth grade, and he's in Miss Thompson's fifth grade class. Fourth grade, Teddy's very slow, but he's well behaved. His father shows no interest. Well, it was Christmas time, and kids like to buy the presents for their teachers, and they all brought packages for Miss Thompson. Well, Teddy walks in with a a package that's wrapped in newspaper because he didn't have money to buy a Christmas package for Miss Thompson. And she opens several packages, and finally she gets to Teddy's package, and it's wrapped in newspaper, and she opens it, and there's a little box in there, and out of this box there's a gaudy rhinestone bracelet with half the rhinestones missing, and there was a half a bottle of perfume. Well, at first, some of the kids kind of snickered and laughed, and then Miss Thompson's like, she didn't want to embarrass him, so she's like, she put a little perfume on, like, oh, it smells so good. And I really liked the bracelet. She put it on her hand, and she jiggled a little bit, and some of the kids finally said, ooh and ah. Well, after all the kids had left and class was over, Teddy walked up to her and says, Miss Thompson, did you really like my present? He said, you smell just like my mama. It was her perfume. And her bracelet really looks pretty on you. Well, the next day, Miss Thompson's heart had changed. And she decided, I am going to make a difference in the life of Teddy. And she began to work with him and work with him and work with him. And by the end of the school year, he had passed over half the class academically. And he had excelled and done really well. And then after the school year was over, his dad moved off and took Teddy with him. And about 7 years later, she got a letter in the mail from Teddy saying, Dear Miss Thompson, I thought you'd like to know that I'm graduating second in my high school class. Wow. 4 years later, she gets another letter, said, Dear Miss Thompson, I'm graduating first in my class from college. Thank you for all your help. 4 years later, another letter. Dear Miss Thompson, I'm now Theodore Stollard, MD. Thanks for all your help. I'm getting married next month. And I want you to come sit where my mom was. My dad died last year, and I have no family. And she did. And she deserved that because she took the time to encourage him. Where would we be if it wasn't for encouragement? Where would I be? My family wasn't going to church. I was out hitting golf balls in a cow pasture. And Teddy Coker and Dallas Cagle pulled up, and they come out in the cow pasture. I'm hitting golf balls and said, we'd love to have you come to church tomorrow. And they encouraged me and said, we'd love to have you. And I finally agreed to go. And that was in April. In August, I walked down that aisle and was baptized into Christ. And now I'm standing here preaching the gospel to you because somebody encouraged me when I was 14. It makes a difference. Everything you do makes a difference. There's something that every one of us can do. I've got a thing here, 101 Ways to Praise a Child. And on the other side, it's entitled 101 Ways to Build a Contagious Church. Little things that you can do. You encourage someone to read the Bible. Encourage a young man to read the Bible. Send a note of encouragement. Several years ago, we had a member in our congregation that sent anonymous notes to members in the church. Now, these notes were a little bit unique in that every note was folded up, and inside this unique note was a $2 bill. And this individual would write things on that note, and it would say, to like a 7-year-old kid who sits up front and sings out loudly, I like it when you sing in church. It brings me great joy. And left their name unsigned. So what do you think that 7-year-old did next week in church? Man, they were sitting up and they were singing. Why? Because somebody encouraged them. I was in the home of a man who was in his probably late 70s or 80s, and this individual had written a note to him anonymously, and he pulled out the note. And it says, I want to thank you for being a part of our church because you're special. And I'm thankful for all you do. And shared some other encouraging words. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, I don't feel special sometimes. But you could see the joy just because somebody in our church felt like he was special. It motivated him. It encouraged him. It stirred him to love and good works. It's something that every one of us can do, and I want to challenge you to do that. And I do have a few copies of this 101 Ways to Encourage or Build the Church Up if you want to do that. But today you can encourage. You can become a child of God. The greatest joy you'll ever. I'm here to tell you, if it hadn't been for encouragement and love, I wouldn't become a Christian. But I want to encourage you right now. The best life is a Christian life. I never regret one day becoming a Christian. God has blessed me far than I'll ever imagine. If I died today, I have been a blessed man. To know the joy that I can go home and be with Him is so incredible. And I wish the Lord would come tonight. But if you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, I'm sure you'd hope He doesn't come. But you can make that change tonight. You can become a Christian. You can be united with Christ in baptism, be raised to walk in a new life. Or maybe you're here tonight and you're just weary and discouraged. This church loves you and it wants to help you. And if we can help you in any way, please come while we stand and while we sing.
Oh, do not let the word depart, and close thine eyes again.